All right, so we're back and ready to dive deep into some pretty intense stuff today. We're talking potential immigration policy changes under a second Trump term. And yeah, it's generating a lot of buzz, not just here in the US, but like globally. We've got a YouTube video that breaks down some of the key proposals, and then a news article that kind of analyzes what the fallout might be. We're going to be talking about some pretty big things like deportation, sanctuary cities, a potential 20-year re-entry ban, even the idea of ending birthright citizenship. So yeah, buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how these proposals are like resonating around the world. It's not just an American issue anymore. Countries all over, especially those with, strong migrant ties to the U.S. are really watching closely, trying to figure out how these changes might impact them. It's almost like the U.S. is kind of holding up a mirror to the world immigration challenges. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like everyone's kind of holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next. And speaking of holding your breath, one of the things that really stood out in the video was the focus on deportation. It seems like some people would be more at risk than others, right?
Yeah, definitely. The sources we're looking at suggest that the focus would be on recent arrivals and people with criminal records.
Yeah.
They would face the most immediate risk of deportation under these changes. Those who've been here longer, those with deeper roots in the U.S., especially long-term residents, seem to be less of a priority, at least initially.
So it's not like a blanket approach, but more of a targeted strategy. Okay, that makes sense. But what about sanctuary cities? The video kind of painted this picture of them as like safe havens for undocumented immigrants. What happens to those safe havens if these proposed changes actually happen?
Well, that's where things could get really interesting. We could see a real clash between federal and state powers. The Trump administration is making it very clear. Cooperation with federal immigration enforcement is non-negotiable. Sanctuary cities that refuse to play ball could face serious consequences, like losing federal funding. Think about it. Police departments, schools, infrastructure projects, all of that stuff relies on federal dollars.
And we're already seeing some of that tension play out, aren't we? The article mentioned Texas Governor Greg Abbott and his efforts to enforce federal immigration laws. It seems like he's really drawing a line in the sand.
Oh, absolutely. Abbott's actions are like a prime example of this conflict that's brewing. And the source actually makes a pretty bold comparison. It likens it to the Confederacy, highlighting how deep these historical tensions run when it comes to states' rights versus federal authority on immigration. It's like a fundamental power struggle that goes back centuries.
Wow, the Confederacy. That's a pretty loaded comparison. It definitely makes you think about the potential for conflict here. But I'm curious, why is national security such a big part of this whole immigration debate? Like, what's the connection there?
Well, if you step back and look at the bigger picture, the administration is framing border security as a major vulnerability. Their argument is that a porous border allows not only economic migrants, but also potentially dangerous individuals, including those with criminal backgrounds, to enter the U.S. They're basically saying a secure border is crucial for keeping the country safe.
And in the video, they specifically called out Mexican cartels. Right. What's the argument there? How do they tie into this national security concern?
Exactly. They view these organized crime groups as a direct threat to national security. They argue that these cartels exploit weak border security to smuggle drugs, weapons, even people into the country. And it's not just about illegal goods. They're linking these cartels to violence and instability, both in the U.S. and in Mexico. So it's a pretty serious concern in their view.
Yeah, definitely. And that actually leads us to one of the most controversial proposals on the table, ending birthright citizenship. This one really made me stop and think. It's a concept that's so deeply ingrained in American identity, but now it's being challenged. So help me understand this. Right now, if a baby is born in the U.S., even if their parents are undocumented immigrants, that baby automatically becomes a U.S. citizen, right? That's birthright citizenship. And Trump's proposal wants to do away with that.
Exactly. The argument is that birthright citizenship acts as like a magnet, encouraging people to enter the country illegally with the specific goal of having children who will then be U.S. citizens. They believe ending this practice would make the U.S. less attractive to those considering illegal entry for this purpose.
But isn't that a fundamental right, like enshrined in the U.S. Constitution? How can you just change that?
Well, that's the heart of the debate. The 14th Amendment grants citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil. But the interpretation of that amendment, especially in the context of undocumented immigrants, has been a subject of legal and political wrangling for decades. This proposal would undoubtedly face legal challenges, and its constitutionality would likely end up in the hands of the Supreme Court.
So we're talking about a potentially massive shift in how U.S. citizenship is defined. Wow, okay, birthright citizenship is one huge change. But then there's another proposal that seems even more drastic to me, the 20-year reentry ban. 2 decades, that's like a lifetime.
Yeah, it's definitely a significant deterrent. The idea is that anyone deported after being caught entering the U.S. illegally would be barred from returning for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's meant to send a strong message. If you try to come in illegally and you get caught, you're effectively exiled for a generation.
So even if they had family in the U.S., like children who are U.S. citizens, they still wouldn't be able to come back for 20 years. That seems incredibly harsh.
That's right. The ban would apply regardless of family ties in the U.S. It's a blanket policy aimed at discouraging illegal entry, no matter the individual circumstances.
It makes you wonder about the human cost, you know? The families that would be torn apart. Okay, so let's say someone's listening to this and they're thinking about coming to the U.S. What's the takeaway for them? What's the message being sent?
The message is clear. If you want to come to the U.S., do it the right way. Go through the legal channels, follow the established procedures. The administration maintains that legitimate asylum seekers will be protected, that their claims will be processed fairly. But if you try to game the system, if you enter the country illegally without a valid asylum claim, be prepared to face the consequences, including this potential 20-year ban.
It sounds like they're really trying to emphasize that there's a right way and a wrong way. And if you choose the wrong way, the penalties are going to be severe. And it's not just individuals who are facing potential consequences. The article also mentions something about states that don't cooperate with these tougher enforcement measures. What's the story there?
Right, there's a whole other layer to this. The Trump administration is putting pressure on states to actively participate in federal immigration enforcement. And they're not just asking nicely. They're wielding a big stick, federal funding. States that resist, that refuse to cooperate with deportation efforts, could see their federal funding slashed.
So we're potentially talking about defunding police departments, schools, infrastructure projects, all sorts of essential services that states rely on. That seems like a recipe for some serious conflict.
Absolutely. And the source quotes Tom Homan. He served as acting director of ICE under the Trump administration. He said they will guarantee funding cuts for states that refuse to cooperate. He didn't mince words.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. And we're already seeing pushback from some states, right? The article quoted Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. He said, "If someone attempts to come for my people, you come through me." Talk about a defiant stance. It sounds like he's ready to go toe-to-toe with the federal government.
Yeah, it definitely feels like we're on the verge of a major showdown. And it raises some crucial questions about the future of U.S. immigration policy.
It's almost like we're standing at a crossroads, isn't it? There are so many potential paths forward, and each one leads to a different destination. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and recap what we've learned from this deep dive. We started by looking at deportation, which seems to be a central focus of these proposed changes, particularly for recent arrivals and those with criminal records.
Right, and we talked about the potential clash brewing over sanctuary cities. The Trump administration is making it clear that they expect full cooperation from states.
Yeah.
And they're willing to use federal funding as leverage to enforce their agenda. It's a power play that could have a ripple effect on everything from law enforcement to education funding.
And then there's the whole national security angle, with the administration highlighting border security and the perceived threat from organized crime, specifically Mexican cartels. They're framing this as a matter of public safety, arguing that stronger immigration enforcement is necessary to keep the country safe.
We also delved into some of the more controversial proposals, like ending birthright citizenship, which would be a fundamental shift in how U.S. citizenship is defined. And then there's that 20-year reentry ban, a measure that would effectively exile those deported after entering the country illegally.
It's hard to wrap your head around the potential consequences of some of these proposals, especially for families and communities. We're talking about policies that could reshape the fabric of American society.
It's a lot to process. And it's a story that's still unfolding. So the question remains, what does the future hold for U.S. immigration policy? Will these proposed changes lead to a more secure nation, as the administration claims? Or will they create deeper divisions, further marginalizing already vulnerable populations? Will we see a rise in federal power over immigration, or will states push back, asserting their own autonomy?
Those are questions that we'll all be grappling with in the months and years to come. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
It's a reminder that immigration isn't just about policy. It's about people, families, dreams, and the very essence of what it means to be American. It's a conversation that demands our attention, our critical thinking, and our empathy.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly multifaceted and consequential issue. It's been an eye-opening exploration, and we hope it sparked some reflection and perhaps even some healthy debate. And to you, our listener, thank you for diving in with us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
It really does feel like we're at a turning point.
Yeah, it's almost like we're standing at this crossroads, So many different paths forward, and each one leads somewhere completely different. But before we go too far, let's take a step back and recap what we've learned in this deep dive. We started by looking at deportation, which seems to be like a central focus of these proposed changes, especially for recent arrivals and people with criminal records.
Right, and we talked about that potential clash brewing over sanctuary cities. The Trump administration is making it clear they expect full cooperation from states, and they're not afraid to use federal funding as leverage to get what they want. It's a power play that could really impact things like law enforcement and education funding.
Yeah, and then there's that whole national security angle with the administration really highlighting border security and that perceived threat from organized crime, specifically Mexican cartels. They're framing this as a matter of public safety, saying that stronger immigration enforcement is really necessary to keep the country safe.
We also, dug into some of the more controversial proposals, like ending birthright citizenship, which would be a huge shift in how U.S. citizenship is defined. And then there's that 20-year reentry ban, which is a pretty drastic measure. It would basically exile those deported after entering the country illegally.
It's really hard to fully grasp the potential consequences of some of these proposals, especially for families and communities. We're talking about policies that could really reshape the fabric of American society.
A lot to take in.
Yeah.
And it's a story that's still developing, So the big question is, what does the future hold for U.S. immigration policy? Will these changes actually lead to a more secure nation like the administration claims? Or will they just create deeper divisions, further marginalizing people who are already vulnerable? Will we see federal power over immigration increase? Or will states push back, asserting their own autonomy?
Those are some really big questions and ones that we'll all be thinking about in the months and years to come. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, and the stakes are incredibly high.
It's a good reminder that immigration isn't just about policy.
Yeah.
It's about people, families, dreams. It's about the very essence of what it means to be American. It's a conversation that we need to be having.
Yeah.
And we need to be approaching it with attention, critical thinking, and empathy.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a really eye-opening exploration, and hopefully it sparked some reflection and maybe even some healthy debate. And to you, our listener, thank you for diving in with us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel, US Immigration News. We hope you are doing great. Well, in today's video, we will be talking about Trump's groundbreaking immigration policy change set to make history. The Trump administration's upcoming immigration reforms are poised to have significant consequences, particularly for those facing reparations. The key focus of these changes is stricter enforcement, especially for unauthorized immigrants with criminal histories or recent arrivals. Figures like Tom Hallman, former acting director of ICE, have been vocal about these policies, warning that individuals who are in the US illegally will face heightened risk of deportation. Deportations has become a central issue, not just in the US, but globally, as the administration stance has attracted international attention. Critics question the fairness of these policies, with a specific focus on how they affect long-term residents versus recent entrants. While those who have been in the US for years may be less likely to face deportation, recent arrivals or those with criminal backgrounds face serious risk of having their lives disrupted. One of the most continuous aspects of the proposed reform involves sanctuary cities, which have long resisted cooperating with the federal immigration enforcement. The new policies aim to strip federal funding from these cities if they refuse to comply with deportation efforts, potentially harming local economies. Reliant on such funds, states like Texas, led by Governor Greg Abbott, have a push for stronger enforcement, igniting debates about the balance of power between state and federal governments on immigration matters. National security is another key concern behind these policy changes. Hallman argues that The southern US border is a major vulnerability exploited not just by economic migrants but also by dangerous individuals, including criminal organizations. The administration's focus is on preventing criminal and terrorist elements from entering the US through stricter border security. Another significant proposal is ending Birthright citizenship, which would deny US citizenship to children born to US soil to undocumented parents. This change aims to reduce the incentive for individuals to enter the US illegally to give birth and secure citizenship for their children, though it raises legal and ethical concerns. A severe consequences of deportation under the new policies is a 20 years ban on re-entry for those deported after attempting to enter the US illegally. This ban applies even to those with close family ties in the US, such as citizen children, making it almost impossible for deported individuals to return for 2 decades. Finally, Holman warned that entering the US without valid asylum claims will result in an immediate deportation and a 20-year ban. The administration intends to strictly enforce these policies to deter illegal immigration and encourage legal pathways for entry. These reforms signal a shift towards harsher enforcement with broad implications for both immigrants and the future of US immigration policy. The consequences for those affected are profound, and the debate over these policies is likely to continue as the Trump administration pushes forward with its agenda.